So we're here with Thor Halvorssen.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, welcome. You are the founder of the Oslo Freedom Forum, and The Economist recently called this the Davos for human rights. Can you tell us a little bit about the idea you had when you started this?
Sure. There was a vacuum with regard to both popularizing and making what is going on in the human rights field accessible to the world at large. Too often human rights has become an issue for experts or for people at the UN or at major multilateral organizations, all of them dressed in gray suits and speaking in a language that's not really accessible, kind of a lawyerly language. And they talk about resolutions and they really don't focus on the victims, the survivors. They focus much more on policies and laws. And what we've learned from history is that individuals are the ones that make the difference. Whether it's Nelson Mandela in South Africa or Gandhi in India or Walesa in Poland, Havel in Czech, Armando Valladares from Cuba, they each were able to peel back the curtain and show the world the terror they were living in. And in doing so, they were able to truly move mountains in terms of public opinion and in terms of inspiring people to do something about it. So what we're trying to do here is bring some of the unknown yet remarkable human rights fighters and link them with the people who are well-known human rights defenders, people who don't need a translator. By that I mean not someone from a big Washington D.C. policy group or some London or Paris human rights group talking about what's going on in these countries. Let's ask people from these countries to come. Let's ask them. Some of them come here with enormous threats to their name, to their families, to their property, and to their freedom. One of our speakers, for instance, from Saudi Arabia, the first woman who decided she took a camera and took a video of herself driving, and in so doing put it on YouTube, saying, look, nothing happened. Why are women not allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia? That's just one way of opening the window into a discussion of how the fact that women have no rights in Saudi Arabia. They're second-class citizens. That's one example. Let's bring her. Let's have her address the crowd. And in so doing, they're doing their little bit to push forward the idea of freedom across the world.
And you've actually had folks that you've invited that were not able to come. They were actually restrained from coming.
Yes. Yes, well, that's to be expected. And that really underlines the importance of this. For instance, we've had several human rights defenders from Russia who were just on Sunday, just several days ago, they were doing an open and sanctioned protest against Vladimir Putin, who pretty much intends to be president or prime minister of Russia for life, and he'll go back and forth. And one of them was prevented from leaving the country. Singapore, a completely different kind of government. If you really think about it, to us, there's no difference between right and left. It's all about up or down.
Right.
And the gentleman from Singapore wanted to come, and the government won't permit him to leave Singapore. So we were able to get a video, and we did the same with Ai Weiwei, the Chinese dissident, the artist, who will not be allowed to leave China. Right. So we were able to surreptitiously get a video out of China so that his voice can be heard here.
One of the things that I'm curious about here, you mentioned that the international peace space is kind of a bit stuffy.
Oh, it's been colonized. Oh, Rick, it's been colonized by experts and lifers and people who do this professionally. That's not to say that someone who wants to devote themselves professionally to this, that's wrong. But it becomes like an inside club.
So were you kind of perceived to be an interloper of sorts?
Yes, that's to put it mildly.
Yeah.
The skepticism that has surrounded this conference in its previous iteration in the last couple of years has been legend in terms of wanting to ascribe either a political agenda or who are these people, why are they doing it? And to some people it's hard for them to get, we're doing this because it matters, because we care about freedom.
Yeah.
And so much of the time the discussion about human rights gets lost into the politics. Oh, I don't mind this dictator because he offers health care. Or I don't mind this dictatorship because they have free markets. And we're like, well, why is it a one or the other? Why can't we have all rights protected? Why must we compromise? Why is it, France just had its election. By the way, I'm sorry about all the noise, but as you can see, it's pretty active in there.
There's a lot happening
here. It's going on right now. I'm missing it. But France just had an election. And people think, oh, French democracy. Of course, that's perfectly natural. And Sarkozy steps down, and his opponent, who just won, steps up. 60 years ago, France was living under a tyrannical dictatorship. 60 years ago, it was occupied by the Nazis. So this is not... I mean, we have to understand is that freedom, democracy in its purest form, a democracy that respects individual rights, is not a given. It's not a given. It's the exception in history. And we have this window from around 1776 to today where some governments here and there have had this freedom. And it's very precious. And a generation that does not study it and understand it, all we need is one generation to forget that, and then we won't even know we've lost it.
Those of us that are in our 30s kind of feel like this is the way that it's always been.
Yes, and in those circumstances, it's not a question of travel more, it's a question of read more. And there's this remarkable literature of suffering and survival of people who live through these sorts of things. And it's very nice when we have, you know, some of the interns that come. And some of them are sort of interested in this, but they're much more interested in the internship or in some of the contacts they can make. And I've had a couple of them come up to me and go, you know, I'm thinking of doing a complete career change. And I told them, you don't have to. You can do what it is you're really passionate about. Just always remember that there are moral consequences to the decisions you make. And here, I mean, you've got governments being slammed, and you've got a lot of corporations who are like, well, you know, we do believe in these things in our country, but in this other country, no, not really.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not acceptable.
We're particularly interested and focused on young professionals. And we define that group as between 20 and 40. These are the folks that are maybe a little bit too old to belong to the more idealistic groups one belongs to in college. And they're a little bit too young to belong to the executive groups and to get access to some of that leader development that happens when you're more senior. So we kind of envision this group to be in kind of a heads down phase of their career, trying to work their way up, getting rewarded for that in the terms of maybe they get a house loan or promotions, etc. And from college, that viewpoint just kind of closes and closes and closes and becomes so focused. And one of the reasons that we think it's so interesting to speak to folks like yourself and folks like E. Benjamin Skinner yesterday is because we're trying to show them the important things that are happening out in the world that they need to find a way to take into account as they lead businesses. Talking to Ben Skinner yesterday about slavery that exists in supply chains, for example, and then drawing some of the other metaphors that happen here. One of the things that always comes up with these folks is, and I'm going to curse here because I think it really describes it well, is the who the fuck am I syndrome. Who am I to do something about this? I'm just this guy that's got this cube that's working down here at this level. And you and your team must have gone through such a personal transformation as you went through the struggle of the last couple of years too, believing in yourselves enough to actually take this to where it is today.
Rick, you can't be, if anyone wants to make a difference in the world, they cannot be attached to the outcome. It's not a question of, I'm going to save the world. That's an extremely arrogant perspective. That's not really going to make a lot of difference other than having someone do the whole look at me thing. Yeah. And we've seen examples of that, even recent examples involving human rights groups that are trying to do some awareness on subjects. Right. Yeah. And it doesn't end well. Vaclav Havel, in an interview that has not aired, and that luckily one of the participants here actually showed me, he did it 2 years ago at Havel's Forum 2000 in the Czech Republic. When asked, what advice do you have for those people that are in the struggle? Right. And that advice can go directly to people who are not in this struggle. Right. I want to say two things. One is, if you're not interested in freedom and in individual rights, well, people ask me, what made you interested in this, and why are you so interested in it? The answer is, well, how is it other people aren't interested in it? Yeah. It's not a question of an issue that should be on the table. It's the table. Yeah. Everything else follows from that. Yeah. But what Havel said is, do what you do and follow your principles. Don't necessarily expect to succeed. But standing for it is in and of itself a big thing. Yeah. And standing for it and being a certain trumpet is called leadership. Yeah. And everyone can display it. You don't need to have money. You don't need to start an organization. Most organizations that get started don't do well, and they fail. But that's okay because you tried. But you don't need to. You just need to have your principles, and that's it. And of course, having principles means educating yourself, and educating yourself about where does it fit in? What role should government have? What role should the individual have? And if anyone asks, well, individuals can't really make a difference, individuals can't change things, well, that's nonsense. Solzhenitsyn from a prison in Siberia wrote Gulag and changed the entire course of the Cold War. At the same time, Aung San Suu Kyi, this fragile, delicate woman with a heart of steel, has altered the history of Burma, or how the junta calls it, Myanmar. And those are just two of dozens of examples. But beyond the field of human rights, you know, if somebody's like, well, but that's not what I do, that's not what I'm interested in, it's the same in business. It's the same in, you know, look at the leaders. And also notice that the leaders don't cut corners. And the leaders don't step over other people to get where they want to get to. There's a lot of people that hide in different industries who are not very principled, but those will all get found out eventually. Those will all, that'll all come out. And being transparent is the other thing. Don't take shortcuts and be transparent. And don't ever be jealous of those who did take shortcuts, and because you know what? That's not you. And if that's not you, that's fine. If you have a platform of integrity, you can build some extraordinary things. And by extraordinary things, I don't necessarily just mean wealth or power. I mean self-fulfillment and happiness.
Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Really
Thanks, Rick. And I'm really, what you're doing is very important. But you shouldn't be talking to me. You should be talking to the folks who are in here.
We're going to do that too.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
All right. Good.